Almost every marriage holds some secrets, usually something small, an uncomfortable truth, a poorly timed word, a mistake both partners agreed to forget. But sometimes, rarely, the secret turns out to be something else entirely, something a husband or wife has been nurturing for years, but inside it, hidden, methodical, with a patience that is terrifying in and of itself. These people don't look like criminals. They go to work, and that is precisely why, when the truth finally surfaces, even the most experienced detectives don't immediately believe what they're seeing.
Broomfield, Colorado, 70,000 residents, tucked between Denver and Boulder, just far enough from both that nothing interesting ever happens. The city is so quiet and predictable that local police had for years boasted one of the lowest violent crime rates in the state. Cities like this attract a certain kind of person, not those who dream of New York, but those who came back from it, or who never planned to go in the first place.
Crystal was exactly that kind of person. She grew up in Colorado, got an education, married Daniel, an intelligent, calm, well-educated man who shared her values. Together, they built exactly what is considered a good life: a house, 3 children, stable careers, a quiet neighborhood. On the morning of October 2nd, 2023, 43-year-old Crystal Krug was getting her kids ready for school. A routine morning: breakfast, backpacks, traffic. She dropped the kids off, came home, glanced at her phone, and saw a message from an unknown number. It was Anthony Holland, a guy she had dated one summer when she was 18, a long time ago. He wrote that he came through her city every few weeks and wanted to see her. Crystal didn't reply and forgot about it.
The next day, another message arrived, and its content alarmed her. This time, Crystal took it seriously, because this wasn't just an awkward message from an ex. This was a description of her day, her car, her route. From that point, threatening messages arrived almost every day. Crystal told her family and began keeping an Excel spreadsheet, logging each message with the date, time, content, and sender number. By the end of October, the spreadsheet had more than 40 entries. Among them were threats against her and Dan, including a disturbing photo of Dan getting out of his car near work. The woman didn't know how to escape this nightmare, so she called the police.
This wasn't the first time Anthony had unexpectedly reached out to Crystal. He had contacted her in 2002 and seemed unwilling to accept rejection. Then again in 2005, 2010, and 2016 through Facebook. He wrote that they were meant to be together, but Crystal had her own views on that. She was already married, and his behavior looked unhealthy. She simply deleted her Facebook and assumed she had heard from Anthony Holland for the last time. The case landed on the desk of Detective Andrew Martinez, who immediately launched an investigation and sent requests to digital service providers. A slow process. Companies don't always respond quickly, but without it, there's no basis for search or arrest warrants. The detective reviewed all the messages, then had her car put on a lift to check for a GPS tracker.
Sometime later, Daniel called the police again. Someone had broken into the garage. Nothing valuable was stolen. Only the spare house key had gone missing. Why didn't they change the locks immediately? Unknown. But that stolen key, as would later become clear, was not a minor detail. It was the first step in a plan that had been building for months. Crystal was frightened. What if the stalker didn't just target her, but her children too? The messages were growing more violent. Photos arrived showing Crystal at different locations and her husband at work. The police seemed in no hurry to act, so Crystal hired a private detective, installed cameras around the house and inside her car, bought a handgun, and carried it in her purse every day. On the last day of October 2023, Crystal again went to the police and handed over all the text messages and emails she had received over the past month. She told them she had doubts that the stalker was actually Anthony. He was behaving too aggressively, and he knew too many personal details about her. December 11th, 2023, 10:47 in the morning, a patrol officer received a call to check on a woman who wasn't answering her phone. He drove over, knocked on the door. Silence. He walked around the house and noticed nothing unusual, but something stopped him near the garage. Some detail hard to explain in words. He moved closer and realized he wasn't tall enough to see through the window. He returned to his patrol car, drove it up to the garage to use the bumper as a step.
151, send medical. I got a female down in the garage. Brookfield Police! Brookfield Police!
On the floor, on cold concrete, lay a woman. On the wall, smeared blood traces approximately 140 centimeters high. The officer immediately began CPR. Medics arrived within minutes and began treatment. The first thing they saw, a severe head wound. But when one of them cut open her blouse, he stopped.
2 wounds, a blow to the head to immobilize, a knife wound to kill. Someone had attacked this woman not in a moment of rage. Next to the body, inside her purse, an officer found the handgun, loaded. She never got the chance to reach for it. The medics worked for a few more minutes, then stopped. Crystal Krug could not be revived. At that very moment, a woman approached the garage, moving fast, almost running. It was Linda, Crystal's mother. Daniel had called the police himself, then called Linda. As it turned out, he had sent his mother-in-law directly into the worst moment of her life. Shortly after, Daniel himself came running to the house.
Officers immediately began canvassing and interviewing neighbors. Detective Martinez arrived at the scene. At that point, the obvious lead was clear. Crystal had been stalked by her ex-boyfriend, Anthony Holland. Months of threats, hundreds of messages, documentation and witness statements. A direct motive. But at the same time, he couldn't ignore Crystal's own doubts about Holland. Police put out a nationwide alert for Holland. Simultaneously, Detective Martinez filed for emergency orders from telecom providers, phone data, IP addresses, account records. With the case now a priority following the murder, responses were expected quickly. While waiting, Daniel Krug was brought to the station for a standard interview. He cried, he trembled, he said he hadn't been able to protect his wife. He eventually composed himself and told detectives that nothing unusual had happened that morning. He said they had driven the kids to school together, and Crystal seemed fine when he left for work.
Daniel also mentioned that Crystal had texted him asking whether he could pick up one of the kids after school. But when he responded and asked what time, Crystal never replied. He said this was strange, which was why he called police and asked them to check on her. Detectives already knew that at 8:15 a.m., exactly 12 minutes after Crystal dropped the kids at school and returned home, the entire security camera system shut down. All cameras, except one, the exterior camera facing the street by the garage. At 8:25, that same exterior camera captured Daniel walking out of the house, getting in his car, and driving away, later than usual. Forensic examiners would later determine Crystal's time of death between 8:15 and 10:30 a.m. Detective Martinez asked Daniel who had access to the security system. Daniel hesitated, then said himself and Crystal. Martinez watched him and noticed one small but significant detail. Although Daniel was crying, no tears were flowing. While the search for Holland continued, Martinez decided to run a parallel background check on Daniel. He went into the archives, and his instincts paid off. He found a stalking complaint, closed, with no resolution, filed more than a decade earlier. The complainant, a woman named Carrie, Daniel Krug's former girlfriend. Detectives tracked her down and invited her to speak. When she began talking, I think even Martinez didn't immediately grasp what he was hearing. After we broke up, he wouldn't let go, said Carrie. She started receiving messages from his roommate, a guy named Tom. Tom wrote that Daniel was really struggling and that they needed to talk. Tom seemed real, and then it turned out Tom was Daniel. He was writing as his own roommate.
But then it got worse. Then came Nick Clark, a cadet from the Air Force Academy. He wrote that he'd heard bad things about her from people around campus, that her reputation at the academy was suffering. She watched as more and more people pulled away. Nick did everything to make sure she couldn't trust anyone. I don't think it's hard to guess. Nick Clark didn't exist either. Carrie went to the leadership. The Air Force Academy conducted an internal investigation and told Carrie that Daniel was behind everything, but the emails had been sent from a public library. There wasn't enough evidence. No resolution was reached.
I want you to understand what Carrie had just told detectives. Daniel Krug, more than 10 years earlier, had already built fake identities to manipulate a woman who wanted to leave him. He already knew how to do it then, and no one stopped him. The detectives recognized the obvious pattern, but pattern alone is not evidence in court. That same night, confirmation arrived from Utah. Officers found Holland at home, heavily intoxicated. There was video footage placing him in Utah at 8 a.m. on the day of Crystal's murder, 8 hours from Broomfield. Impossible to make it in time. Holland was interviewed. He said the last time he had reached out to Crystal was sometime around 2014-2016 because he missed her, but after she deleted her page, he stopped. Investigators confirmed that on the day of the murder, Holland had purchased a sweater at a local store. Transaction completed at 12:16 p.m. There was a receipt and security footage. He had an alibi, and the case against him collapsed. Anthony Holland was real, but he had done nothing.
Then, the digital data came back from the providers. The IP addresses from which the Anthony emails had been sent traced back to Daniel Krug's office. Daniel immediately had an explanation. Public Wi-Fi, anyone could have connected. Plausible. Then came the next fact. The burner phones, the cheap devices used to send Crystal the threatening SMS messages, had been purchased with a gift card, registered in Daniel Krug's name, and cell tower data showed those phones were always in the same location as Daniel's personal phone. He had been carrying both simultaneously for months.
Detective Martinez walked back into the interview room with a different energy, not statement from a victim's family, but conversation with a suspect. At that point, investigators didn't yet have enough to arrest him. As Daniel left the station, he said the real killer was still out there and asked them to find him. Just when the case seemed headed for the cold case shelf, digital forensics expert Randy Epilogue found more evidence on Daniel's and Crystal's mobile phones, specifically text messages from the morning of the murder. On Crystal's phone, there were messages sent to Detective Martinez and then to Daniel, the very message Daniel claimed he received while driving to work. But Epilogue discovered that this message had been scheduled in advance. It was programmed before Daniel even left the house. These messages were designed to establish his alibi, to make it appear as though Crystal was alive and texting him after he had already gone.
Detectives also reviewed Daniel's Google account and found his search history from the evening before the murder. How hard do you have to hit someone in the head to knock them unconscious? When is a head injury life-threatening? Another key piece of evidence. The photos of Daniel that had supposedly been taken by the stalker turned out to have been taken on his own phone in selfie mode, using a timer. Here, everything fell into place. There was no Anthony. There was no stalker. There was only Daniel, 2 phones, and a plan he had been building for 4 months. The blunt object used to strike Crystal and the knife, police never found them, but the evidence was more than sufficient without them. On December 16th, 2023, detectives had an arrest warrant. Officers located Daniel Krug on his way to his daughter's recital. He got out of the car and lay on the asphalt without resistance. In doing so, he effectively confirmed he knew exactly why they had come. It turned out that Daniel and Crystal's marriage, though it appeared perfect, was not. In the final year, Crystal had made a decision. She wanted a divorce. According to family, Crystal was a direct person. She told Daniel plainly the marriage was over, but she offered a compromise.
he could remain in the house for the sake of the children until their oldest daughter finished high school. Daniel heard it differently. To him, it sounded like, "I have time to change her mind," or to stop her. He knew that divorce meant dividing assets, and most importantly, dividing time with the children. His brother was a police officer. His sister-in-law was a prosecutor. Daniel Krug didn't just understand the legal consequences in general terms. He knew them in detail, and he chose what he believed was a logical solution, not by our logic, but by his. If Crystal was afraid, she wouldn't leave him. If there was a stalker, she would need her husband nearby. He invented Anthony. He chose a real name, someone from Crystal's past who would be hard to locate quickly. He took time to learn the details: Crystal's routes, her schedule, where she went and when. He photographed himself and sent the photos to her as if they came from Anthony.
Remember, I mentioned the stolen spare key at the beginning? That stranger who supposedly broke into the garage in September? That was Daniel. He reported his own break-in to the police, so that when he used that key in December, the case file would already contain a record of an unknown intruder. But Crystal was smarter than his plan. She kept the spreadsheet. She hired a detective. She went to the police again and again, and at some point, she looked at her husband and said out loud what she'd been feeling for a long time. Crystal had told the detective the stalker was behaving unlike any ex she'd known, sexually aggressive, but also too well-informed, knowing things only someone close to her could know. And she said she wasn't sure Anthony was responsible. She had figured it out, and she said it to Daniel's face. After that, he began preparing to kill her. The evening of December 10, the Google searches. The morning of December 11, he waited for her inside the house.
Daniel Krug was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole on the murder charge. Despite the overwhelming digital evidence against him, Krug returned to his old habits. Calling family from prison, he claimed he had been wrongfully convicted, but even his brother, a police officer, believes Daniel received a just sentence for what he did.
There is one fact in this case that could have changed everything. Detective Martinez had sent requests to digital providers back in November, weeks before the murder, but the companies were slow to respond. If that data had arrived on time, the IP address from Daniel's office could have pointed the investigation toward him as early as November. Many people believe this was a failure of the police. The truth is, it wasn't the detective's fault, and it wasn't Crystal's fault. She did everything right. It is a systemic gap. Stalking cases don't receive the same priority as homicides. Until a person is dead, resources are thinner. That is why Crystal's parents sympathize with Martinez and believe their daughter was condemned regardless of the outcome of his investigation.
At the beginning, I said, sometimes a secret turns out to be something a person has been nurturing for years inside the marriage, hidden and methodical. Daniel Krug spent 4 months building an entire world of fake identities, planted evidence, and controlled fear. He manipulated his own children, the police, and his mother-in-law, who cried with her head on his shoulder, not knowing she was embracing the man who had murdered her daughter. And yet his perfect plan fell apart, not because of one mistake, but because of a chain of small things: the phones, the IP address, 2 lines in a Google search, and of course, the Excel spreadsheet that Crystal kept right up until the end. She documented, she searched, she never gave up.